everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to play some Battleground. Let's go.
As always, if you see your name in this battle, please drop me a comment and say hi. So we recently had some changes made to damage reduction in Battleground. So I wanted to test this out and I had a little bit of trouble last week when the patch went live and basically couldn't match with anyone. Now I queued for over an hour and 40 minutes one day on two separate instances. So the first instance I queued for 40 minutes and the second instance I queued for an hour and I still did not get a match. So there was a little bit of an issue with that. Now, I do believe that this was self-inflicted simply because I did not play Battleground for the past season very much. So I'm only in bronze rank for it with a 70% win rate just because I really haven't been playing Battleground at all. I've kind of avoided it. I haven't taken part in it for shadow tasks. For shadow task, I basically focused on Vault, as that now gives obviously multiple shadow task completion. So I was kind of interested to see what this damage reduction would look like. Wanted to test it out, but obviously it also seems like the battles are a little bit more balanced. So GameZone mentioned it when we spoke, and we basically both said that the matches do seem a lot more balanced with regards to resonance, player experience in Battleground, etc. So I was kind of excited to test it out and see if it was actually somewhat enjoyable again, because as I mentioned, the reason I've not been playing Battleground is because I just haven't been enjoying it, and I've mentioned that in multiple videos around PvP recently. So we're going to see how this battle goes. Obviously we are on the defending team rather than attacking. Now I do find I have a much easier time when I'm attacking in Battleground rather than when I'm defending. And you can see I'm actually using the same build here that I use for Shadow War every week. So this build seems to work quite well in Battleground as well as in Shadow War. So that's why I decided to go for it. And also I've been testing out a few different things in Battleground as well, which I'll share in another video soon. Now, one thing to mention with damage reduction in Battleground is that the melee classes actually have a larger damage reduction than the range classes. So although the same percentage damage reduction was given to all, it does work out better for those melee classes, and that's simply because they believe that as they're closer combat, they take more damage. However, I wouldn't always believe this because classes like Necromancer are obviously ranged. However, they do sometimes have to fight quite close to actually use their skills and utilize their skills to the best extent. And also classes like Tempest, they really do not need any more buffs or anything extra than any other class. Tempests are just a complete nightmare. Probably the only class that I actually do struggle with in Battleground. I sometimes have a little bit of an issue with Barbarians, however the build that I use does help with that. But yeah, definitely Tempests are still a nightmare, and I'm hearing this from a lot of different content creators and a lot of players in game as well. I'm hoping that Tempest days are numbered, similar to what happened with Blood Knight, because as you may remember if you've been here for a while, Blood Knight was kind of top for everything when it first launched in game, and then eventually they did balance everything out, and Blood Knight now is kind of not doing so great. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with Tempest long term, and I'm hoping that some other classes may be given a little bit of love. Obviously Monk is doing a lot better now. A few people have swapped to Monk since the changes were made recently to a few skills, and yeah, it's good to see a few more different classes showing up in these battlegrounds. Now I wasn't going to talk about build, but it's been a while since I touched on this. So starting off with set items, we're using 4 pieces of Angmets. The duration of your additional Ignite status is increased by 30%, and there is a 15% chance of attaching an Ignite status to an enemy when dealing damage with primary attacks or skills, dealing 23,889 damage over 3 seconds up to a maximum of 3. Alongside this, we're using 4 pieces of Grace. All continual damage, channel damage and persistent ground damage is increased by 15%, and each time you deal damage to an individual enemy 5 times, you'll do 19,909 additional damage to that enemy. Moving on to legendary items, on the helm we're using Vaishya's Resourceful Countenance. Scorch now launches an electric orb that explodes on impact, creating an electric field that pursues enemies and inflicts them with shock. Scorch damage increased 18% and Scorch cooldown decreased 10% from the awakened slot. On the chest we're using Lysana's Sorrow. Frostfield now grants you Creeping Chill, causing your attacks to chill enemies and freeze them on critical hits. Frostfield cooldown is reduced 7.2% and cooldown reduced 10% from the awakened slot. On the shoulder we're using Searing Judgment. Disintegrate now channels fire, burning enemies for additional damage over time. Disintegrate damage is increased 18% and disintegrate energy is consumed 10% slower from the awakened slot. On the pants, we're using Hastened Oblivion. Disintegrate's cooldown is reduced 1.6 seconds when damaging enemies, up to a maximum of 4.8 seconds. Disintegrate damage is increased 10% from the Awakened slot. On the main hand, we're using Entropic Edge. Disintegrate damage is increased 19% and Disintegrate energy consumed 10% slower from the Awakened slot. Withering Chill on the offhand, Scorch critical hit chance is increased 29% against chilled enemies and 50% against frozen enemies. Scorch damage increased 10% from the Awakened slot. Scour Cut on the alternate main hand, Disintegrate range is increased by 29% and energy is consumed 10% slower, again from the Awakened slot. And finally, Azkalor's Fire on the alternate offhand, Scorch damage is increased 19% and cooldown is also decreased 10%. So that's what I'm using for this setup. You could go for different pants. So there are pants for Frostfield. I can't remember the name of them, but they actually shatter enemy armor. So I kind of swap between the two and yeah, see which gives a better result. I kind of just play around with it every now and again. I kind of don't get much of a different result between that and the build that I'm using with the essence on the Hastened Oblivion essence on pants for Disintegrate. So I have quite a lot of essences stacked on Disintegrate, as you probably noticed from the build information, but that seems to work really nicely for me with this setup. So just to touch on a couple of other things with this build that I used in this specific battle, my gear was giving me 22% critical hit chance, and that doesn't include legendary gems or anything like that. And I also had critical hit chance from my warband buff, so I use the attacker buff when I'm playing Battleground. This increases my critical hit chance, and I have quite a few remnants stacked on that as well. Our warband, I've mentioned it before, Purge the Depths, and have some really good remnant sets saved. So that works really nicely within this build. And then my legendary gems, I'm using my normal setup. So we've got Blood-Soaked Jade, Starfire Shard, Roiling Consequence, Pain Clasp, Seeping Bile, Bottled Hope, Mother's Lament, and of course Wolfjord. So back to the changes that were made in Battleground, the damage reduction is definitely making the matches feel a lot more fun and a lot more balanced as well. What I'm finding is it's generally taking longer to take players down, which is similar to what Battleground was when I first started playing. It was definitely a lot more fun back then, and that's kind of the vibe that I'm getting from it again now. So it's going to be interesting to see what it's like with the season reset. Obviously, as I mentioned, this battle was filmed last week, as you can tell from my Paragon level. But with the season reset, obviously, it's always a mess for the first couple of weeks. Matches are always really unbalanced because everyone is starting at the same rank. But you can see here, battle is about to end in any moment. And yeah, my thoughts on it is that it's a positive improvement for Battleground, and I'm quite happy with how this battle went and how the balance was feeling. So anyway, that was it. Victory for our team. We did actually manage to defend nicely there. And overall, this was the result. So really strong result there, 21 assists and 9 kills. But that's it from me today. I hope you've enjoyed this video. And as always, thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.